The gunshot echoed through Silver Creek Valley like thunder on a cloudless day, sending a flock of startled birds into the sky above Katherine O'Malley's farmhouse. She clutched her side, blood seeping through her fingers and staining her faded blue dress as she stumbled toward the barn. The outlaws who'd raided her home had left her for dead, but Katherine was far too stubborn to die on their terms. The summer of 1876 had been merciless to the territory of Wyoming. Drought had withered crops, bandits roamed freely, and Katherine, widowed just 6 months prior when her husband succumbed to fever, had been barely holding onto the homestead. Now, with a bullet in her ribs and her supplies stolen, even her legendary determination might not be enough. She collapsed against the barn door, her breath coming in painful gasps as darkness threatened the edges of her vision. The sound of approaching hoofbeats made her heart race with fresh terror. Had the outlaws returned to finish what they started? Instead, a tall figure on horseback emerged from the tree line, a stranger wearing a dust-covered duster and a wide-brimmed hat pulled low over his eyes. The man dismounted with practiced ease, his spurs jingling softly as his boots hit the ground. "Madam," his deep voice carried across the yard. "You hurt?" Katherine tried to stand straighter to show strength, but her legs betrayed her. As she slid down the rough wooden door, the stranger sprinted forward, catching her before she hit the dirt. "They took everything," she managed to say. "Don't worry about that now," he said, carefully lifting her. "Let's get you tended to first." Through the haze of pain, Katherine noticed his face weathered by sun and wind, with kind eyes that contradicted his hardened appearance. A thin scar ran along his jawline, disappearing into several days' worth of stubble. "I'm Matthew Sutton," he said, carrying her into the house. "Was passing through when I heard the shots." "Katherine O'Malley," she whispered, wincing as he placed her gently on the kitchen table. "Everyone calls me Kate." "Well, Miss Kate, we need to stop this bleeding." Matthew worked efficiently, gathering what little the raiders had left behind. He heated water, found clean rags, and produced a small medical kit from his saddlebag. "This will hurt," he warned, preparing to extract the bullet. Katherine closed her eyes. "It already hurts to breathe," she whispered. The cowboy's hands paused for just a moment. When she opened her eyes, his gaze had softened as it met hers. "Then I'll breathe beside you," he said quietly. "Count with me now, 1 breath at a time." True to his word, Matthew synchronized his breathing with hers, steadying her through the excruciating process of removing the bullet and cleaning the wound. His presence was oddly comforting, a stranger who'd appeared from nowhere, yet somehow felt like a lifeline she could cling to. When it was done, he helped her to her bedroom and ensured she was comfortable before heading outside to secure the property for the night. Katherine drifted in and out of consciousness, fragments of conversation and movement swimming around her. She vaguely remembered Matthew checking her fever, helping her drink water, speaking in that low, reassuring voice. Morning came with painful clarity. Katherine awoke to find her side bandaged and the house tidied. She could hear movement outside, the rhythmic sound of chopping wood. Carefully, she pushed herself up, gasping at the sharp pain in her side, and made her way to the window. Matthew was in the yard, swinging an axe with practiced precision. He'd removed his duster and rolled up his sleeves, revealing muscled forearms tanned from years under the sun. A gun belt hung low on his hips, the holster worn from use. He moved like a man accustomed to hard work and harder living. Katherine watched him for several minutes before attempting to leave her room. Each step was agony, but she forced herself to the kitchen, where she found a pot of coffee brewing on the stove. The door opened, and Matthew entered with an armload of firewood. He stopped short when he saw her. "You shouldn't be up," he said, quickly setting down the wood and moving to support her. "I've never been good at following orders," she replied, her voice stronger than she expected. "Even sensible ones." A smile touched his lips. "I can see that. At least sit down before you undo my handiwork." She allowed him to guide her to a chair, appreciating his strength without resenting it, a novel experience for a woman who'd spent years proving she needed no man's help. "Why are you doing this?" she asked as he poured her coffee. "Helping a stranger." Matthew's expression grew distant. "Not many folks left who'd do the same for me. Figure the world could use more kindness, not less." He handed her the cup. "Besides, those men who shot you, I've been tracking that gang for 2 months. Katherine studied him more carefully. "You're no ordinary cowboy." Used to ride with the Rangers in Texas. He glanced out the window. Now I hunt bounties. Those men are wanted for murder in 3 territories. Do you intend to go after them? Matthew nodded. Once I know you're not going to keel over the minute I leave. I've survived worse than this, Katherine said, though the pain in her side suggested otherwise. I don't doubt it, Miss Kate. He smiled again, a genuine expression that transformed his hard features. But everyone needs help sometimes. Over the next 3 days, Katherine's strength gradually returned. Matthew proved himself useful beyond medical care. He repaired the barn door, reinforced windows, and hunted fresh game to replace her stolen provisions. They fell into an unexpected rhythm, working together in comfortable silence, punctuated by conversation that grew increasingly personal as hours passed. She learned he'd been born in Missouri, had fought briefly in the war as a young man, and had spent the years since wandering between Texas and Montana. He asked about her life, listening intently as she described growing up in Boston, moving west with her husband Thomas, and learning to run the farm alone after his death. You're remarkably capable, he observed on the 4th evening as they sat on the porch, watching the sunset paint the valley in gold and crimson. Necessity teaches quickly, Katherine replied. When Thomas died, people expected me to sell the farm and move back east. As if I'd abandon everything we built, Matthew nodded. Seems to me most folks underestimate what a determined woman can accomplish. Most men, you mean, most everyone, he smiled. My mother ran our farm after my father died. Raised 3 boys alone, kept us fed during the worst drought in memory. Taught me never to judge strength by its appearance. Katherine found herself watching him when he wasn't looking, noting the gentle way he handled her injured mare, the patience in his hands as he fixed the broken porch step. For a man who hunted killers for a living, there was a surprising tenderness about Matthew Sutton. On the 5th day, as Katherine was feeling well enough to help with chores, riders appeared on the horizon. Matthew spotted them first, his hand instinctively moving to his holster. Stay inside, he said, his voice dropping to that dangerous tone she'd not heard since the day he arrived. Those could be neighbors checking on me, Katherine protested. Could be, or could be your visitors returned with friends. He guided her toward the house. Either way, I'd prefer you safe inside until I know for certain. Katherine reluctantly complied, but stood at the window with her husband's old shotgun across her arms. She watched as Matthew positioned himself casually by the corral, appearing relaxed while maintaining clear sight lines to all approaches. The riders' 3 men in trail-worn clothes slowed as they neared the property. The lead rider, a silver-haired man with a sheriff's badge pinned to his vest, raised a hand in greeting. That's Sheriff Wilson from town, Katherine said, relief flooding her voice as she stepped onto the porch. The sheriff dismounted, eyeing Matthew with professional interest. Mrs. O'Malley, good to see you in one piece. Storekeeper was worried when you didn't make your usual supply run. His gaze shifted between her and Matthew. Everything all right here? Thanks to Mr. Sutton, Katherine explained what had happened, watching recognition dawn on the sheriff's face as Matthew's name was mentioned. Matthew Sutton, the bounty hunter, Sheriff Wilson extended his hand. Heard stories about your work in Colorado Territory last year. Matthew shook it with a modest nod. Just doing what needs doing, Sheriff. Well, those men who raided Mrs. O'Malley's place, they hit 2 other farms before heading south, killed a man at the Wilson homestead. The sheriff's expression hardened. We're organizing a posse. I know their patterns, Matthew said. Been tracking them since Laramie. The men began discussing details while Katherine listened intently. The raiders had been identified as the Blackwell Gang, 5 men responsible for a string of violent robberies throughout the territory. You riding with us, Sutton? The sheriff asked. Matthew glanced at Katherine, something unspoken passing between them. Yes, but I need 1 more day to make sure things are secure here. After the sheriff and his deputies departed, Katherine confronted Matthew in the barn where he was checking his saddle. You don't need to delay on my account, she said. I can manage now. I know you can. He continued working, not meeting her eyes, but those men are dangerous. I want to make sure you have proper protection before I go. Katherine crossed her arms. I've been protecting myself for some time now. "And doing a fine job of it," he agreed, finally looking up with a wry smile. "The bullet hole in your side notwithstanding." She couldn't help but laugh, though it sent pain shooting through her ribs. "Fair point, Mr. Sutton, Matthew," he corrected gently. "After patching you up and eating your cooking for nearly a week, I think we've moved past formalities." That night, as they sat by the fire, the conversation turned personal in ways Katherine hadn't anticipated. "Why bounty hunting?" she asked. "Seems a lonely way to live." Matthew stared into his coffee cup for a long moment. "It started after my wife died. Sarah and our daughter were killed by raiders at our homestead in Texas. I was away helping neighbors with a cattle drive." His voice remained steady, but Katherine could see the old pain etched in the lines around his eyes. "When I got back, there was nothing left to save." Katherine's heart ached for him. "I'm sorry, Matthew. It was 7 years ago now." He set the cup down. "I tracked those men for months. After I found them, I discovered I had a talent for hunting those who think they're beyond justice. Been doing it ever since." "And have you found what you're looking for?" she asked softly. He looked at her then, really looked at her, with eyes that had seen too much darkness. "Until recently, I wasn't looking for anything but the next bounty." The implication in his words hung between them, delicate and unacknowledged. "What about you?" he asked. "Will you stay here alone forever?" Katherine's instinct was to bristle at the question, to defend her independence as she had countless times before. Instead, she found herself answering honestly, "I don't know anymore. I stayed because this land was our dream mine and Thomas's, but lately—" She gazed around the small cabin. "Lately I've been wondering if holding on to the past is worth sacrificing a future." Morning brought preparation and tension. Matthew insisted on reinforcing the house's defenses before his departure, showing Katherine hiding spots for emergency supplies and creating signals they could use if she needed to alert neighbors. As midday approached, he saddled his horse and secured his weapons. Katherine stood in the yard, a complex mixture of emotions churning inside her. In less than a week, this stranger had become important to her in ways she couldn't fully articulate. "I'll return when it's done," he promised. "You don't owe me that," she said, though her heart argued otherwise. "It's not about owing." He adjusted his hat, squinting against the sun. "I'd like to come back if you'll have me." Katherine felt heat rise to her cheeks. "I'd like that too." He mounted his horse with fluid grace, looking down at her with an expression that made her pulse quicken. "Be careful, Matthew. Always, M. Kate." He tipped his hat and turned his horse toward town, where the posse would be waiting. Katherine watched until he disappeared over the ridge, then returned to the empty house that somehow felt different than it had a week before. Days passed slowly. Katherine recovered her strength, tending to chores and keeping vigilant watch. Neighbors, alerted by the sheriff about the attack, checked on her regularly, offering assistance she now graciously accepted instead of proudly refusing. A week after Matthew's departure, Katherine was hanging laundry when she noticed dust on the horizon. Her hand moved to the pistol Matthew had insisted she keep at her waist, but as the riders drew closer, she recognized Sheriff Wilson's distinctive gray horse. There were only 4 riders returning from a posse that had left with 7. Katherine's heart constricted as she scanned the group, searching for Matthew's familiar silhouette. When she didn't see him, her knees nearly buckled. Sheriff Wilson dismounted wearily, his face grim. "Mrs. O'Malley." "Where is he?" she demanded, fear making her voice sharp. "Sutton's alive," the sheriff assured her quickly. "But he took a bullet during the confrontation. We left him at Doc Miller's in town." Relief washed over her, followed immediately by concern. "How bad?" "Bad enough, but the doc says he'll pull through. Sutton's a tough one, took down 3 of the gang himself even after being shot. The gang, all accounted for, 2 dead, 3 headed for trial." Sheriff Wilson removed his hat. "Sutton asked me to tell you he'll keep his promise as soon as he's able." Katherine barely waited for the sheriff to leave before hitching her wagon. The 10-mile journey to town seemed interminable, each bump in the road a reminder of her still healing wound. By the time she reached the doctor's small house at the edge of Silver Creek, dusk was settling over the mountains. Doc Miller, a kind-faced man in his 60s, seemed unsurprised by her arrival. "Been expecting you, Mrs. O'Malley. Our patient's been asking about you since he woke this morning." He led her to a small room where Matthew lay on a narrow bed, his torso heavily bandaged. His face was pale beneath his tan, but his eyes brightened when he saw her. "You shouldn't have come all this way," he said, attempting to sit up before wincing in pain. "Apparently stubbornness is contagious," she replied, moving to his side. "I caught it from you." A smile tugged at his lips. "Doc says the bullet missed anything important." "Important to whom?" Katherine asked, earning a chuckle from the doctor as he discreetly left them alone. For 2 days, Katherine remained in town, staying at the small hotel and spending hours at Matthew's bedside. They talked more openly than before, as if his brush with death had removed some barrier between them. "I've been thinking," Matthew said on the 3rd evening as she read to him from a worn copy of Tennyson's poems found in the doctor's bookshelf, "about what comes after." Katherine set the book down. After I'm healed, after the bounties." He reached for her hand, his calloused fingers gentle against hers. "I've been chasing ghosts for 7 years, Kate. Maybe it's time to stop running." Her heart quickened. "What would you do instead?" "There's good land still available up north, or," he hesitated, "a farm that already exists might need a partner." Katherine studied their intertwined fingers. "Farming is hard work, Matthew, especially with a partner who still sometimes finds it hurts to breathe." "Then I'll breathe beside you," he said simply, repeating the words that had sustained her through her darkest hour. "Every day, if you'll let me." The tenderness in his voice broke something loose inside her, a fear she'd been holding since Thomas died, a certainty that she would face the world alone forever. "I think I'd like that very much," she whispered. 2 weeks later, Matthew was strong enough to travel. Katherine brought him back to her farm, their farm now, though neither had formally acknowledged the transition. Summer was fading into autumn, the aspens turning gold on the mountainsides. They settled into a new rhythm, Matthew's strength complementing Katherine's knowledge of the land. He sold his bounty earnings to purchase new livestock and seeds for spring planting. Together they worked from sunrise to sunset, rebuilding what had been lost and creating something new. The first snowfall came early that year. Katherine woke to find the world transformed into a glistening white landscape, pristine and silent. Matthew was already outside, clearing a path to the barn. She watched him through frosted glass, this man who had appeared in her life like an answer to a prayer she hadn't known she'd spoken. That evening, as they sat before the fire, Matthew took her hand. "I have something to ask you, Kate." She looked at him, this man who had changed everything. "Yes, I know it hasn't been long by most standards." He paused, uncharacteristically nervous. "But I've learned that time isn't always the best measure of what matters." Katherine's pulse quickened as he moved from his chair to kneel before her. "I love you, Katherine O'Malley. I thought my heart died years ago, but you've brought it back to life." He produced a small gold band, simple but beautiful. "Would you do me the honor of becoming my wife?" Tears blurred her vision as she nodded. "Yes," she whispered. "Yes, Matthew." They were married 2 weeks later in the small church in Silver Creek. Sheriff Wilson stood as Matthew's best man, and the storekeeper's wife, who had become Katherine's friend during her stay in town, arranged wildflowers despite the snow. Winter passed in a cocoon of intimacy and shared dreams. They planned for spring planting, designed additions to the house, and learned each other's bodies and hearts by firelight. Katherine discovered that loving again didn't diminish what she'd shared with Thomas, it honored it, proving that the capacity for love only grows when exercised. Matthew laid his ghosts to rest, speaking of Sarah and their daughter with fond remembrance rather than raw grief. He carved a small wooden horse for the child they both hoped would come, placing it on the mantel as a promise of future joy. When spring finally arrived, melting the snow and warming the earth, they worked side by side planting crops and mending fences. Katherine found herself pausing sometimes just to watch Matthew, the way sunlight caught his profile, the gentleness in his hands as he tended a newborn calf, the smile that came more easily each day. One evening in late April, as they sat on the porch watching the sunset, Katherine took Matthew's hand and placed it over her abdomen. "I have news," she said softly. Understanding dawned in his eyes, followed by wonder and joy. "A baby," she nodded, tears spilling onto her cheeks. "Our baby." Matthew gathered her into his arms, holding her as if she were the most precious thing in the world. "I love you, Kate," he whispered against her hair, "more than I have words to say." I love you too, she replied, nestling against his chest. Thank you for staying. For breathing beside me when I couldn't breathe alone. Always, he promised, for as long as we both have breath. As stars appeared in the darkening sky, Katherine thought about the journey that had brought them to this moment, a bullet that should have ended her life, but instead had transformed it, a chance encounter that had healed two broken hearts. She thought of the child growing within her, a testament to new beginnings and second chances. Life in the Wyoming territory would never be easy. There would be harsh winters, dry summers, and the constant challenges of frontier living. But Katherine knew with bone-deep certainty that whatever came, they would face it together, breathing in unison, finding strength in each other's presence. When their daughter was born the following winter, a strong, healthy girl with Matthew's eyes and Katherine's determination, they named her Hope. She grew up hearing the story of how her parents found each other, of promises kept and love that healed old wounds. Years passed, turning into decades. The small farm prospered, expanding into neighboring land. More children followed Hope, two boys with their father's quiet strength, and a younger girl with her mother's fierce independence. Silver Creek grew from a struggling settlement into a proper town, with the Sutton farm becoming known for its hospitality and prosperity. And through it all, through joy and sorrow, triumph and hardship, Matthew kept his promise. When life left Katherine breathless, whether from childbirth, illness, or simply the overwhelming beauty of their shared existence, he breathed beside her, steady and true, until she found her rhythm again. On their 30th anniversary, with their children grown and grandchildren playing in the yard of the home they had built together, Katherine took Matthew's weathered hand in hers. "Do you remember what you said to me the day we met?" she asked. His eyes, still kind despite the lines that now surrounded them, crinkled with his smile. "I promised to breathe beside you, and you have," she said softly, "every single day." "Best promise I ever made," he replied, bringing her hand to his lips. As the sun set over the mountains that had witnessed their story from its beginning, Katherine leaned against the shoulder of the man who had once been a stranger but had become her entire world. The evening air was sweet with the scent of summer flowers, their grandchildren's laughter carried on the gentle breeze. In that perfect moment, breathing came easily to Katherine Sutton. And beside her, always beside her, Matthew breathed too, their hearts beating in perfect synchronicity. A harmony that had begun with a whisper of pain and blossomed into a lifetime of love.